We still have room in the freezer, so I'm thinking of stopping at Kroger for stuffing. I watched the face of Kate, my wife of 20 years, as she spoke through the open window of the 40-foot luxury van. This may be our last family trip camping vacation. In 6 weeks, our daughters will begin their freshman year at the University of Texas at Austin, and everyone has been looking forward to this trip. Kate has seemed a little distant lately, and I thought this trip might be a chance for us to rebuild our relationship. Our daughters would have a chance to walk and explore the neighborhood together, and I was hoping for intimacy with my wife, something that had been sorely lacking lately. It won't take more than half an hour, so I don't see a problem, I replied. We had no schedule and gave ourselves plenty of time to get from Fort Worth to Amarillo by mid-afternoon. I was just in the middle of loading luggage into the outside compartment of the huge van. Everything we might need for tonight was already stowed in the inner compartments. Taylor and Kendall, our 18-year-old twin daughters, were sitting in the van's living room texting with friends. We were a month away from seeing our friends, a lifetime for a teenage girl. During these vacations, boys and girls would break up, get back together, and split up again. Disagreements between friends would arise, subside, and begin again. The daily drama that makes up the lives of high school girls continued without them for a month, and only the electronic communication of their cell phones kept them up to date on all the important events they missed. We had our Toyota Highlander in tow and were able to tour, leaving the van at various campgrounds as a base. Hopefully, these adventures will distract them from the important events they missed. All right, I'll make a list to get in and out of the house as soon as possible. She pressed her lips together and made a kissing sound. Love you, baby, she said, and turned away from the window. This morning she was wearing black yoga pants, a black tank top, and white tennis shoes. Her blonde hair was gathered into a ponytail, and she had only natural gloss on her lips. At 180 centimeters tall, she was naturally slender, and her breasts were in proportion to her body. Her weight was only 5 pounds more than when she started playing for the University of Texas women's volleyball team in college. She was beautiful, as only a close girl can be beautiful, and glowed with excitement about our upcoming vacation. When I first suggested the trip, she didn't seem to agree, but over the past few weeks, that reluctance had grown from reluctant consent to growing excitement. This was the last time we had taken an RV trip since the pandemic began, and the girls were almost as excited to see the southwestern United States as they were to see Disneyland when we arrived in California. Physically, they were like their mother, but they had an aptitude for math and logic, and like their father, they were leaning toward a career in engineering. But above all, they were teenagers looking for fun. I was just putting the last bag into the outside luggage compartment when I was startled by the squeal of the brakes of a red Mustang that had stopped, nearly smashing into the back of the van. A young guy jumped out of the car and strode briskly toward me. He looked to be in his early 20s. He had blonde hair and a blonde mustache, and he was about my height, 5 feet 2 inches. But he looked a little better than me. He looked muscular and trim, whereas I had acquired a father body in the 20 years since graduating from college and getting married. I weighed 20 pounds more than I had in college and had recently started running again in an attempt to lose that weight. When he quickly walked over to me, I could see the anger on his face. "Where is she, you son of a bitch?" he shouted at me. I took a step back, startled by his abrupt tone. Katie, come here. I'm taking you away from that violent asshole," he shouted. I must have looked confused and concerned that this psychopath had shown up at my house, calling me names and yelling about my wife. "Who the hell are you?" I shouted at him. I braced myself for an attack in case this crazy dumbass lunged at me. "Where's Katie?" he asked again. This time there was even more aggression in his voice. I started to feel nauseous just thinking about it. My daughters got out of the van, and I knew from the position of their cell phones that they were recording. My wife came out of the van. She was as pale as a ghost and shock was frozen on her face. She seemed unable to speak at this point. "Katie, let's go. I'm taking you away from that cruel asshole. You'll never have to worry about him again." He held out his hand to my wife. "Come on." My daughters walked over to me and stood on either side of me, wrapping their arms around my waist. "Mom, who is this guy? Why does he keep calling Daddy abusive?" Kate didn't answer Taylor's questions. She looked from the stranger to me and then back to the stranger. Her look was like a mixture of shock and fear. Her mouth was open, like she was trying to speak but nothing was coming out. "I'm Kate's fiance," he answered my daughter. "We're just waiting for your parents' divorce to be finalized so we can get married." I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. I tried to focus and stay calm. An outburst of anger would do no good, especially since my daughters were recording everything. "Mom, what is that man talking about?" Taylor said, and Kendall stared at the scene with eyes that seemed to outgrow her face. "Kate," I said softly. She just stared at me, fear frozen on her face. "Kate," I repeated, "is it true? Do you know this guy? Are you engaged to him?" My wife just stared at me. Her eyes didn't seem to understand the situation. To a lesser extent, I had observed this in previous situations with Kate. "How long have you been in a relationship with my wife?" I asked the stranger. For the first time since he'd gotten out of the car, he looked unsure of himself. "9 months. We started at the beginning of the school year." So he was a teacher, just like Kate. Given his looks, he might as well have been a middle school coach. "She told me about how you manipulate her and your children with emotional and physical abuse. I'm here to take her away from your crap." "Our daddy isn't one of them. If our mom really said those things, then she's lying to you," Kendall said. "Mom, you said those things about Dad?" "Let me explain," Katie said. She was finally able to speak, and the first thing out of her mouth was the expression, cheater. Disgust appeared on Taylor and Kendall's faces. "Explain what?" Taylor pounced on her mother. "Are you having sex with this guy? Are you cheating on Dad?" Tears rolled down the faces of all three women. I shook my head. No need to explain anything. I reached into the luggage compartment and pulled out Kate's suitcase. I placed it in front of my wife's fiancée. "She's all yours," I said. I turned my daughters toward the van. "Let's go, girls. We can still make it to Amarillo before it's too late." My daughters threw my wife a disapproving look, turned their backs on her, and walked toward the van door. They turned in unison, extending their middle fingers toward their mother and her lover. Kate clutched at my arm. "Peter, please don't leave me." Despair came over Kate in waves. Her lover stood helplessly by her side. Things were not happening at all as he had imagined. He'd seen himself as a white knight coming to her rescue, and now he was faced with the idea that this damsel in distress might be a dragon in disguise. "Don't leave us. I need to be away from you. I'll contact Terry and start the divorce. Get yourself a lawyer and give his contact information to Terry." Terry Carr had been my college roommate, and we'd remained close friends for nearly a quarter century. Although he didn't practice family law, he had a lot of connections, and I knew I'd be in good hands. Kate fell to her knees and began to sob. Even an hour ago, seeing her in this state would have destroyed me. And now? Not so much anymore. The daughters sat down, and I pulled the van away from the curb. In the mirror, I saw Kate cover her face with her hands, and her boyfriend awkwardly put a hand on her shoulder as he watched the van pull away. The drive from Fort Worth, Texas to Amarillo, Texas on Highway 287 is about as boring a drive as any other place in the United States. Miles of emptiness until you hit the void that is Wichita Falls. I remember an article in an old issue of Texas Monthly magazine that caught my eye at my grandparents' house. The article listed the 10 worst jobs in Texas. In ninth place, chicken sexologist, a person who examines chickens to determine their sex. Number 10, being a resident of Wichita Falls, Texas. We didn't make a stop in Wichita Falls. After Wichita Falls is the town of Quanah, Texas. It is named in honor of the great Comanche chief Quanah Parker. He was born to a white woman who was captured as a child by the Comanches, Cynthia Ann Parker and her Indian husband, Comanche chief Pete Nakona. We had lunch in the small town and walked around the town square, while I photographed the girls in front of the Quanah Parker Monument at the Hardeman County Building. Cynthia's story was the inspiration for the John Wayne movie, The Seekers. Another way my daughters emulated me more than their mother was that we appreciated classic movies. In the weeks leading up to the trip, we watched several classic movies, including The Seekers and the Paul Newman movie HUD, filmed in Claude, Texas, which we drove through just before arriving in Amarillo. As we drove, all three of us turned off our phones. I knew one of two things would happen. Either we would get a barrage of calls and texts from Kate begging us to come back for her, or radio silence would ensue as she realized she was now free to leave us and her life behind and be with the new love of her life. No controlling, abusive husband or daughters weighing her down. Freedom. A boring ride like the 287 gave me plenty of time to think things through. The van, though huge, 40 feet, was a dream come true. The van wasn't actually mine. It was a joint purchase by my parents, Guy and Tony Conroy, and their best friends Don and Emily Franks. My mom and Emily Franks had been best friends since 8th grade. They went to prom twice in high school and roomed together at North Texas State University in Denton, Texas. It was at NTSU that Tony Peterson met a shy law student named Guy Conroy. They dated for a few weeks, after which Guy and Tony introduced their best friend Emily to Guy's best friend Don Franks, another law student. 2 years after graduating from law school, Guy married Tony, and Don married Emily. Less than 2 years after graduating from law school, and within 6 months of their wedding, both couples had healthy children. Guy and Tony had a boy named Peter, after Tony's family, the Petersons, and Don and Emily had a beautiful blonde angel they named Catherine, after Emily's mother. Catherine was inevitably shortened to Kate. Memories of Catherine began before I even knew her. There was no time that she wasn't present in my life. The first time I saw Kate naked was when we were less than a year old, and our mothers stuck us in the bathtub together. I still shake my head over that picture. Today, my parents would be arrested for a picture like that. We were everything to each other. There was no experience we didn't share. Every act, from the first ice cream cone to the first roller coaster ride, from the first day of school to the first kiss, to the first time we made love. We went to the University of Texas together, me in engineering and Kathy in literature, and got her teaching certificate. I took a job with an aerospace company in Fort Worth, and Kate went to graduate school at NTSU, our parents' alma mater. Over the next 7 years, Kate earned her doctorate in literature, began teaching at Fort Worth Community College, and gave birth to our daughters. After Kate took over teaching, I decided to start my own business. I had 6 patents from an aerospace corporation. I had hoped to take all 6 with me, but it was decided in arbitration that 2 of my patents were the product of labor and belonged to my previous employer. 4 of my patents, however, were found to belong to me and were not the product of labor. I was free to use and license them as I saw fit. I licensed 3 patents and decided to open a manufacturing facility to create a 4th. Even though there were 2 of us, we were one. Together, we were better, stronger, and happier. We were supposed to be together forever, until we weren't. It wasn't the first time Kate had lost her way. 5 years ago, she had a miscarriage. The pregnancy was a joyful surprise, and when the initial shock passed, we were beyond excited at the thought of a 3rd child. Katie had been on antibiotics due to a tooth extraction, and as our doctor explained, it had likely affected her birth control pills. Whatever the reason for the miracle, we were over the moon. In the 3rd month of her pregnancy, while she was teaching a class on gender identity in the works of Hemingway and Fitzgerald, Kate started having severe cramps. She excused herself from class, went to the bathroom, and had a spontaneous abortion in the women's restroom stall across the hall from the classroom. Repeated calls to me went to voicemail. I was in a clean testing room with no cell phones. So she called her mother, which also went to voicemail. The next call was to her other mom, my mom. She was rushing there to be there for her sister-in-law. Kate didn't see fit to call an ambulance, so when my mom found her sitting at her desk crying quietly, she and Emily got in the car and drove to the hospital. The doctor told her she was fine. Sometimes the body rejects a pregnancy. It was quite possible that there was something wrong with the fetus that caused the rejection. If she wanted to try again, there was a good chance the pregnancy would make it to term, though nothing could be guaranteed. Kate didn't want to risk another pregnancy. She asked me to have a vasectomy, and I did. Our family of 4 was enough for me. But after the miscarriage, Kate became depressed. The happy and cheerful girl I had grown up with was gone. All expressions of my affection were rejected. She became increasingly aloof. She didn't want to talk to me about it and would get furious when I mentioned that she needed to see a therapist. She stayed away from her friends and her social media went silent. For months, I tiptoed around her for fear of saying the wrong thing and making her angry. I talked to our moms and they advised me to give her time and she would come around. But I wasn't so sure. All of a sudden, she was feeling better. She was texting and posting on Facebook again, and I started to see glimpses of the old Kate. Just when I thought things were getting better, one Saturday afternoon, Kate came running through the front door screaming about Taylor and Kendall. She was almost frantic. Her eyes were wild and she was in a panic. "What's the matter, Kate?" I asked. I grabbed her shoulders to calm her down. "What's going on? Why are you looking for the girls?" "I have to see them. I have to explain something to them. I think they misunderstood something." She looked in all directions, just not at me. At that moment, my daughters walked into the house and approached her. "Have you told him yet?" Taylor asked. "Of course not," replied Kendall. "Otherwise, Daddy will get mad and yell at her." "Girls, let's talk about this in your room. It has nothing to do with your father. I don't know what you think you saw, but you're wrong." They both looked at Kate incredulously, then turned to me. We were leaving the movie theater at the mall. We walked past the line to get tickets for the new Maria Montoya movie, and what did we see? Our mom making out with some jerk, in public, at the freaking mall. I looked at Kate, frowning deeply. "Kate, what's going on? Are you cheating on me?" She burst into tears standing in the kitchen. "She saw us watching her," Kendall said. "She ran after us, but we ran into Engstrom's store and lost sight of her. We came home to tell you what we saw before she could lie to you about it." "You're having an affair," I stated firmly. "No, no, I'm not cheating on you and I'm not having an affair," she said, unable to look me in the eye. "Who is he?" "He's just a friend," she replied. "I need a name," I said. "I want to know which of your friends thinks it's okay to kiss my wife." "I won't tell you," Kathy said. "I'll tell him it shouldn't happen again. We can be friends, but it shouldn't happen again." "Bullshit. Tell me who he is right now or next time I'll be talking to you in divorce court." Kate went pale and opened her mouth in shock. "You can't be serious. You're divorcing me over a friendship that's gone too far." "Test me," I said. "Go ahead, test me. Refuse to tell me his name and see what I do." She snapped back. She gave me his name, Kevin Saunders, and the fact that he was an adjunct professor at her college. He became a sympathetic shoulder for her to cry on, which led to inappropriate conversations, texting, sending topless photos, thankfully faceless. I told her to pack her things and move in with her parents. I didn't want to be around her now or for the foreseeable future. Kate was crying too hard to drive herself, so I dropped her off. Frank was working in the yard and had to know something serious had happened. His crying daughter had just been dropped off with an overnight bag, and her husband, who was like a son to him, drove off with barely a wave of his hand. To her credit, Kate was honest with her parents. Then, when my parents were called to their house, she was honest and apologized to them as well. She stated emphatically that kissing was not just kissing. When asked how far things would have gone if the girls hadn't spotted her at the mall, Kate looked concerned. "I hope nothing would have happened. I hope I would have come to my senses and realized I was walking down a dark road with no good ending. I just thank God that the girls saw me and put an end to it." Kate hadn't deleted any of their messages, and those messages confirmed that they hadn't had sex yet. I was under no illusions. If she hadn't been found out, she would have slept with him. I used to treat infidelity issues with a certain amount of innocence, but I quickly became well-versed in the issue. I became a regular visitor to some of the internet forums dealing with infidelity and cheating. I learned a whole new vocabulary and set of acronyms and abbreviations. AP, cheating partner; BS, betrayed spouse; WW, unfaithful wife; WH, unfaithful husband; OBS, other betrayed spouse. D-Day 1 is the day you found out about the infidelity. D-Day 2 is your second day, which usually happens because the truth leaks out because your WW is not telling you the whole story, because he is in self-preservation mode. So you do a OTT 180, which is a form of communication that is 180 degrees different from your normal lovemaking. There is no irrelevant chit-chat. Only matters related to the house or the kids are discussed. The goal is to get you out of infidelity either through reconciliation or divorce. Then other sites came along. Sites supporting adultery used acronyms such as MM, married man. The secrecy of the affair was concealed by adhering to OPSEC, operational security, as if the secrecy and deception required to cheat and betray a trusting partner was a CIA craft. But I get it. I saw no sign of Kate's emotional affair and was grateful it hadn't escalated into a physical one. I remembered that a few weeks before D-Day, She started turning her phone away from me when she texted. She was also taking the phone into the bathroom with her and sleeping with the phone under her pillow. All of these signs are obvious, but when you love and trust someone, you become an easy target. The result of her little adventure was that I insisted she keep her job. If she wanted to teach, she could teach middle school or high school. She also agreed to complete transparency of all electronic devices. No codes, no communication apps other than Apple's native texting app, no text deletions, location always on. I gave her an old iPhone so she could log into all her apps and keep track of them. I kept that phone and put my own password on it. If there was any cheating, I would divorce her without hesitation. She agreed to everything. Gradually, I began to trust her. I began to keep our marriage in order by checking the cloned iPhone several times a day for messages, calls, and location. Once a day, I logged into her Apple App Store account to check for downloaded apps that could be used for cheating. Not just dating or social networking apps, but harmless games with internal messaging capabilities. I checked phone bills and compared the data used to what the cloned phone showed. She also started teaching middle school. She was the only teacher at the school with a doctorate, and having Dr. Catherine Conroy on the faculty was prestigious for the school. Kate hoped to teach at a university someday. She thought she could teach a couple of courses a semester and use her office hours to work on her novel. The emotional affair threw everything out of whack, and while she realized that her actions had made her a full-time high school teacher with very limited opportunities to write a novel, she was also resentful of me for making her do it. We were trying to deal with her resentment and the aftermath of her novel when 18 months later we received the devastating news: cancer. During a routine self-examination, Kate discovered a small lump in her right breast. Since it was small, it didn't bother her too much, but she made an appointment for a mammogram and consultation anyway. The mammogram resulted in a biopsy, which led to a diagnosis of breast cancer. Both Kate's mother and grandmother had undergone mastectomies as a result of a breast cancer diagnosis. In her grandmother's case, the surgery was performed too late and she passed away as a result. Kate's mother, Emily, made the decision to have her breasts removed after her mother was diagnosed, and after testing revealed that she was also a carrier of the BRCA1 gene that causes breast cancer. The analysis showed that Kate was not a carrier of the gene, so she had not planned to have her breasts removed, as a lumpectomy would have sufficed. However, the diagnosis shook her to the core. Kate was very proud of her body and her breasts. Even after nursing 2 children, her breasts remained firm, without the slightest hint of sagging or stretch marks. The thought of having her breasts surgically removed plunged Kate into a depressive state, from which she struggled to get out. She was aloof and unhappy with me and our girls. The slightest displeasure caused her to react in a way completely disproportionate to her resentment. This went on for months until one day she woke up and started being the Kate we loved. This triggered memories of what happened after the miscarriage. Depression was replaced by a sudden return to normalcy. I hadn't looked at the cloned iPhone in months, but I pulled it out of the drawer, charged it, and prepared for the worst. And this is what I discovered. Nothing. No messages to unknown numbers. No photos or videos sent to someone else. No questionable apps downloaded or used. No questionable search history. It seemed that with the help of advice and willpower, Kate was back. Of course, I realized now that I was kidding myself. In fact, I had taught her the best lies. In the past, I had searched cell phones several times. Coat pockets pushed into the far corner of the closet were searched. Shoe boxes and shoes were checked. Nothing and nothing. I checked under the seats of her car, the glove compartment, the console, and the trunk. I checked all the places to hide a cell phone. The only place I couldn't check was her classroom at school. If she hid her cell phone at school, there was no way to find it. Kate didn't use her cell phone or computer for me to see or access. As diligent as I was and as well-versed as I was on infidelity, I was simply dumbfounded when her lover showed up at our house. The drive from Quanah, Texas to Amarillo was a quiet one. We were all immersed in our own thoughts about what had happened this morning. The girls knew we were going through a divorce. They had caught their mother cheating during her first affair and begged us to fix the marriage. The second affair was much worse than the first. It lasted longer, was sexual in nature, and resulted in Kate falling in love with her fiancé. God, just thinking about it made me furious. The fact that she had clearly lied to him about our relationship hit me so hard I could barely think about it. Not only was she talking about me to some asshole, but she was lying while doing it. I'm a lot of things, but I don't abuse and never have physically or mentally. We didn't actually stop in Amarillo. Our plans were to stop at Palo Duro Canyon State Park. Palo Duro is the second largest canyon in the United States, the largest being the Grand Canyon. We planned to stop at the park for a couple days and then continue west on I-40, which runs along much of Old Route 66, through Tucumcari, New Mexico to Albuquerque with stops north to Santa Fe, and then back south through Indian Pueblos to get to Flagstaff, Arizona. From Flagstaff, we traveled north to Las Vegas where we spent 3 days and then continued west to Los Angeles. We planned to spend a week in LA and visit Disneyland, Universal Studios, and all the other tourist spots in LA and Hollywood. From Los Angeles, we were going to head north on the Pacific Coast Highway to San Francisco. We were going to spend a few days in the area, checking out Fisherman's Wharf and, now that the girls had turned 18, Napa and Sonoma Valleys. From there, it was down the I-80 highway through Salt Lake City, Cheyenne, then through Nebraska and Iowa, to our next major stop, Chicago. We planned to stop in Chicago for a few days to shop on Michigan Avenue and watch a Cubs game at Wrigley Stadium. We planned to spend no more than 5 days in Chicago, but if we didn't think there was enough room, we could have left earlier. From Chicago, we headed south to Nashville for a couple days and then Memphis for a day or so. I wanted to see Graceland, and after seeing the movie Elvis and Austin Butler's performance as the king, the girls were totally on board with that too. After Memphis, we continued southwest through Arkansas and back to our starting point, Fort Worth, Texas. It was an epic month-long trip that the four of us will remember for a lifetime. Ha! As the saying goes, man plans and God laughs. Kate and I had been to Palo Duro Canyon as kids. It was during a joint family vacation which pretty much characterized all of our vacations. We toured the canyon and hiked up various hiking trails, including the lighthouse, an iconic rock outcropping that is the most famous symbol of the canyon. We also saw the musical Texas in the canyon's outdoor amphitheater. This was the first live musical we had seen and we were blown away. This show is a singing and dancing story about the early pioneers of the Texas Hill Country that culminated with fireworks at the end. After seeing this show at an early age, Kate and I developed a love for musical theater that has persisted to this day. The twins learned to love theater because of us, and they both participated in high school musicals. Thankfully, they sing like their mom and not like me. After hooking up the van, we decided it was too late for a walk, so I grilled some hot dogs and opened a container of potato salad. I allowed the girls to have either 1 glass of wine or 1 glass of beer at dinner, but only at home or with their parents. They both chose the wine and looked at me with a grim expression. "I think this means divorce," Taylor said. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Why would she do that to you? To us? Why would she lie about you? She told that guy you were cruel. Daddy, you're the cruelest man I've ever met," Kendall added. "I doubt my mom can tell me why she lied," Taylor said. I took a sip of my beer before answering. "You're right, T. I doubt she'll be able to explain it, but I can." I hesitated for a minute before finishing my thoughts, but I decided that the twins had turned 18 and I could have adult conversations with them. They are adults, and I will talk to them as adults. No one wants to be the villain in their own story. There's such a thing as a victim triangle. It has to have a victim, a savior, and a stalker. Treason and betrayal go against your mother's core beliefs. She considers herself a good and moral person. To justify her actions to herself, she needs to make me the villain, not herself. If she is the victim, then I am the stalker and her boyfriend, or fiancé, or whatever she calls him, is the rescuer. Your mother knows that I am a loving, faithful partner who has forgiven her in the past. She has to portray me as controlling, abusive, and manipulative so that the villain is me and not her. Like I said, no one wants to be the villain in their own story. A thoughtful expression appeared on the girls' faces. Taylor nodded her head. In order for mommy to be Snow White and Dipshit to be a prince, you have to be what? A gamekeeper? An evil queen? I nodded. One of them, both of them. I don't know for sure, but soon it won't be my problem. I pulled my iPhone out of my pocket. I'm going to go check my messages. Girls, stand back in case this thing blows up. They both giggled and pulled out their phones too. When my phone turned on, it buzzed and buzzed and buzzed and buzzed and buzzed. Messages, missed calls, and voicemail. I should have immediately blocked Kate before leaving Fort Worth, but I didn't, and now I was paying the price for it. I quickly corrected that oversight. I also deleted her messages and voicemails. All that remained were a few messages from my mother, Kate's mom, and her father. Oddly, there were none from my father. Mom's messages started with a concerned tone and then became increasingly irritated. Mom, Pete, call me right away. I'm worried. Mom, Pete, call me back. It's very important. Mom, Peter, I need you to call me right now. Damn it, Peter, you need to stop this nonsense and call me. Damn it, Peter. You better damn well call me right now if you know what's good for you. Is that how you want to play it? It's not going to end well for you, I promise. Wow, I thought. I wonder what her voicemails sound like. The response was the same as her messages, only increasingly angry and belligerent. Her first voicemail message set the tone, and it only got worse from there. Mom, Peter, your wife is hysterical. You need to fix this immediately. So she made a mistake. You need to put your ego aside, put your pants on, and take care of your wife. Mom, Peter, I'm ashamed to call you my son. You left your crying wife with a stranger and went on vacation. You're pathetic, and I'm ashamed that I carried you for 9 months. I put the phone on speaker so the twins could hear them. To say they were shocked is an understatement. They were shocked and upset. I can't believe Mimi said such horrible things to you, Taylor said. Kendall turned pale and openly cried. I think we know whose side she'll take. The messages and voicemails from Kate's parents weren't as angry and hostile as those from my mother, but it was obvious that they were upset and angry. And it was obvious that the source of their anger was me. There were no messages or voicemails from my father. It was strange. I deleted all the messages and voicemails and then watched the girls delete theirs without listening to them. We turned off our phones and stared into the fire, reflecting on the fact that it had been a shitty day. The next day, we enjoyed hiking the canyon and then went to the Texas show in the evening. The girls loved the show, and it was just as cool as I remembered it being. We spent 2 days in Amarillo and then turned off the I-40 freeway and headed west. We had hoped for 4 weeks of vacation, but we actually spent 5 weeks there. Some of our day trips took 2 or 3 days. Eventually, we realized we needed to come home. The girls needed to be in Austin the following week for dorm check-in and class registration. The original plan was for the 4 of us to rent a U-Haul truck, tow it behind my cab pickup, and take the girls to their dorm room. They shared a room their first semester, so the move would have been pretty easy. That was until their mother decided to blow up all of our lives. My dad was sitting on the porch of our house when we pulled up. I looked around, but didn't see Kate, her parents, or my mother. Since his motorcycle was parked in the driveway, I figured they hadn't gone with him, and he must be alone. I got out of the van and stretched before heading toward the house. Dad, I said. Pete, he admitted. What's new? He grinned. I guess that's not a serious question. Not really. Are you alone? Yep. They don't know about the GPS in the van, and Frank knows as much about computers as your grandmother. And she died 10 years ago. They don't know we're back? That shook me to the core. I'd been trained for war, and I'd come home with nothing. No, I decided to keep that to myself. Were your phones disconnected the whole time? We bought a couple landlines in Flagstaff. The girls wanted to stay in touch with their friends, and I needed to stay in touch with work and Terry. He nodded. Well, Terry did her job. She was serviced at her parents' house last week. I guess that didn't go so well, I said. God, that's the goddamn understatement of the year. Kate has been in a mental institution since she was served. Her parents are upset and mad at you. Mad at the girls. Basically mad at everyone but Kate and your mother. Where is dear mom? I asked. After listening to her voicemails, I realized I'm not her favorite person. None of you are, he nodded toward the twins. She's so mad at the 3 of you that she can't even form a coherent sentence. This whole week has turned into a Tijuana donkey show. I'll explain that term later, I told the girls. I realized they were going to ask about the donkey shows in Tijuana, and that wasn't a conversation I was in the mood for. Your mom's at her house, Dad said. I threw my dad a perplexed look. At her house? At her house, he confirmed. I filed for divorce too. After this sensation, we interrupted our conversation to unload the van and wash it. Afterward, we grilled hamburgers for dinner and chatted about our trip. We avoided the topic of Kate and her lover, my mother, and other grandparents. I told the girls I didn't mind them going to my mother's house, but they declined. They wanted to go see what their friends were up to, so after dinner, they each gave me a hug and a kiss on the cheek and promised to be back by midnight. I grabbed a bottle of Milam and Green, 2 glasses and a couple cigars, and met my dad on the patio. I poured each of us a couple fingers of bourbon, and then we performed the cigar lighting ritual that most men master at a young age. We silently puffed and sipped our cigar as we watched the night shadows grow. "So what happened?" I asked. Dad took a sip of bourbon before answering. "She was always very close to Emily and her family. Sometimes I thought she was closer to them than she was to her own family. Me, you, and the girls. When this whole thing blew up over Kate, I expected your mother to take your side and be mad at Kate. And that didn't happen," I stated. He shook his head. "Not one bit. She was furious at you for reacting the way you did in leaving. Angry at her granddaughters for leaving with you. And furious at me because I said I didn't blame you. I didn't see her messages to you at the time, but I saw them later. I heard her leaving you voice messages. I didn't like what she was saying to you, but I didn't say anything to her at the time. There was no point in adding fuel to the fire. I know you and I know that after the last time she contacted the other guy, you ended it." "Did you know about the other incident?" I inquired. "I hadn't told anyone. I heard Kate, Emily, and your mom talking about it a few months after it happened. I know it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but bad enough. But not as bad as it is now. A few days later, it turned out that all 3 of you had turned off your cell phones. Find My iPhone wasn't working, and you weren't answering texts and voicemails. Each day was even shittier than the last. Kate spent hours crying, wailing, and carrying on with her life. Her parents were desperate, and your mother was increasingly angry at you and hostile towards me. A week later, her parents locked Kate in the psychiatric ward of Methodist Hospital. They were afraid she would kill herself. That really pissed your mom off. And having dipshit hanging around didn't help either." "Wait, what?" I asked incredulously. "Her boyfriend was still on her mind." Dad just nodded his head. "He kept saying he wouldn't leave her. He wouldn't leave her like her asshole husband did." Dad looked at me apologetically. "Those are his words, not mine." "Well, isn't that pretty damn cool?" I said. "I tried to convince him to get the hell out, but Emily and your mom wanted him around. Honestly, I don't think Kate wanted it, but she was like delirious, so I don't know what was going through her head. The last conversation I had with your mom, I told her that son of a bitch had to leave or I would." "And what did she say?" I asked. "Don't make me choose between Emily's family and you. You might not like the way things turn out." "Screw me," I sighed. I always suspected that Emily's family loved her more than her own, but to do it so immediately. The next day, I moved into one of the apartments the firm keeps for clients. Terry Carr also referred me to a divorce attorney. I was not comfortable using your services. Afterward, we sat sipping bourbon and smoking cigars and silently contemplated our future. 2 marriages destroyed by infidelity, one directly, the other as collateral damage. I arranged to meet Kate at her parents' house. I made it a condition that it was just the 2 of us, no parents, and definitely no assholes. Kate's always been a looker. Tall, slim, and trim, blonde and lightly tanned. She'd always looked at least a dozen years younger than her 42 years, and this incident hadn't changed that. My heart jumped to my throat when she opened the door at my knock. When I pulled up to the house, her parents' car was gone, as was my mother's. A couple hours before we met, I looked around the neighborhood and saw all 3 cars in the driveway. I also noticed the same car that her lover had driven up to our house a few weeks earlier. It was parked on the street 2 houses down from her parents' house. 2 hours later, at the appointed time for our meeting, I drove around the block and saw his Mustang 2 streets over from Frank and Emily's house. My mother's car was parked behind him, and there were 2 people sitting in his car. It was just amazing. "Hey, baby," Kate said, opening her arms and reaching out to hug me. "Stop it, Kate. I don't need your hug." I walked across the living room and sat down in a chair. I usually sat on the couch with Kate when we came to visit, but I didn't want to give her the opportunity to sit next to me. She sighed and sat down on the couch across from me. Baby, we have to get through this. There's too much love between us to give it all up just because I made a stupid mistake. A mistake? Getting engaged to another man while you're still married to me? That's what you call a mistake. I shook my head. I'm here to discuss the next steps in our divorce. Terry Carr tells me you haven't given him the name of your attorney. That's because I don't want a divorce. I want you. I think we can save our marriage. Correction. I know we can save our marriage. I love you and I know you love me. We can do whatever we want to do. What about your fiancé? Don't you think he has something to say about that? She asked wryly. He's not my fiancé? Yes, I had an affair with him. It was wrong, and I regret it. I like him, but I'm not in love with him. I'm only in love with you. Are you still seeing him? Kate didn't look me in the eye. She focused on her hands and started twirling her wedding ring. He comes by to check on me. How often? Once, twice, daily? Every day? All day? Tears came to Kate's eyes and she became visibly more emotional. You left me, she screamed. You drove away and left me crying in the yard. He was there for me when you were gone. You went to him because you were upset that I left you. And the reason I left you is because you cheated on me with him. It was like the old anecdote about the kid on trial for killing his parents and asking the judge to take pity on the poor orphan. Yeah, but it's over with him. I'm not seeing him now, she said. So if I get in my car and drive around the neighborhood, I won't see him 2 streets away sitting in a car with my mother? Kate's eyes widened as she realized I wasn't buying her nonsense. I stood up and said, Kate, find a lawyer and give him the information about Terry. You can marry that asshole and I can move on with my life. We'll see each other at weddings and funerals and eventually disappear from each other's lives forever. You'll just be the man I was once married to. She looked at me in horror. She turned pale as paper. No, no, I can't. Never see you. Kate began to sob. She wrapped her arms around her upper body and began rocking back and forth, humming, No, 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 no. I stood up and looked sadly at my soon-to-be ex-wife. I shook my head and walked out of the house. I drove across 2 streets, stopped next to Deepshit's car and rolled down the window. His window was already down. I looked through it at my mother and she looked at me with undisguised hostility. I just came out from Kate's, and she's in a complete state of distress. Maybe you should go check on her. I'm done. I headed home. Nothing comes easy, so I didn't expect the divorce to be easy either. Kate hired a lawyer, a vicious pit bull named Donna K. Rafferty. DKR, as she was known in the press, was famous for securing the largest divorce judgment in Texas history when Dallas socialite Pauline Pickett, N.E. French, sued her husband, oilman Danny Pickett Jr., for $270 million. Everyone and everything had warned Jr. about Pauline, because everyone and everything had taken Pauline for a test drive at one time or another. But Jr. was nothing like his old man. The latter was known to wear a leather belt with a hole in the front, to the right of where he'd been shot in the stomach during a bar fight. Not only did he not fall down and stay down, but he beat the man who shot him to death with a pool cue. The older man was smart and tough, something the younger man didn't have. But half a dozen years before, the older one had died in a plane crash, leaving the younger one his oil company. I knew I was in for a battle. First, they demanded marriage counseling. I refused. It wasn't the marriage that was destroyed, it was my wife. This led to nothing but court-ordered 10 sessions for which I had to pay. I could choose my counselor, but that was faint consolation. Dennis Lampier advertised himself as a marriage counselor specializing in the trauma of infidelity. Reviews of him on the internet were rave reviews, and he himself was listed as court-approved. My first phone interview with him went well. It wasn't until Kate and I sat down in front of him that I realized the case was likely to go south. Mr. and Mrs. Conroy, what do you want to accomplish from this consultation? I mentally added to the list of demands that Kate returned to her maiden name. I made a mistake. I had an affair with another man. I feel terrible about it, and I want to find a way to overcome my mistake and use it to build a better, stronger marriage. I looked at her in disbelief. She's still dating that asshole. She's engaged to him, for crying out loud. Dennis admonished me. We try to avoid yelling and swearing in these classes. Please be calm and respectful of each other. Kate, is this true? You are really engaged to another man, and yet you tell us you are trying to save this marriage? It's true. Brian asked me to marry him. I told him no. I want to save my marriage. I looked at Lampier. Would you say that's textbook monkey breeding? Why do you ask that? He replied. She doesn't want to commit to her boyfriend until she's convinced our marriage is beyond saving. But she also doesn't want to commit to him until I agree to be her husband. That's monkey branching in its simplest form. Kate chose a moment to speak. If you promise to stay for me, I'll tell him I can't marry him. I'll give the ring back. I stared at her for a moment. The fact that we're even discussing whether you accepted a marriage proposal from another man tells me how bad this marriage is. When was the last time you had sex with him? Kate started twirling her wedding ring. At that moment, I realized everything was going to hell. I don't remember, she said. Come on, Kate. No one believes that. You're a smart woman. You have a doctorate. You know exactly how many times you had sex with him. When, Kate? When was the last time you had sex with him? This morning, she said quietly, and tears rolled down her face. I'm so sorry, Pete. It was this morning. I stood up, nodded to the therapist, and walked out the door. I knew it was going to be really bad, and it was. In an attempt to reason with me, they pounced on everything I owned. Businesses, patents, everything. By this point, I just wanted out. The girls went to college in Austin. I put them in a dorm, much to their mother's dismay. I turned down her request to join us. She approached the twins, but they declined as well. They had no sympathy for her and wanted to have as little to do with their mother as possible. I had blocked my mother, so I had no idea if she was trying to contact me, and I didn't care. My parents' divorce was finalized long before mine. My mother had a good job as a CFO, so spousal maintenance was not an issue. My father signed the house over to her, and since it was long paid off, she had minimal expenses. She agreed not to touch his legal partnership, and they parted ways. My father felt he could no longer work side by side with Frank and exercised an option that forced Frank to either buy him out or stop practicing law. Frank bought him out, and my father moved to Austin and became counsel at the oldest law firm in Texas, Bonham, McLeod, and Garcia. Eventually, Kate and DKR ran out of ways to drag out the divorce. I signed the house over to Kate. I sold my business for a pittance, mostly for the value of the land, building, and equipment, and gave Kate half of the proceeds. Kate also received half of the rights to my patents. I took it a step further and agreed to fully transfer the patents to her on the condition that that would be the end of it and she would sign the papers. To every obstacle they put in my way, I agreed. There would be no more attempts to get additional money or property from me. That's it. Finito, done. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had also moved to Austin. I bought a condo on Lake Travis within walking distance of many restaurants and stores. The twins came to my place for dinner several times a week and often brought their friends. They often used the complex's pool, and on any given weekend, bikini-clad girls would come in and out of my apartment. I was amazed at how many helpful young people lived in Austin. Every weekend I would get offers to help with any projects around the house. Of course, the fact that there happened to be half a dozen smartly dressed girls around had nothing to do with it. 6 months after the divorce, the twins, my father and I each had a glass of wine on the terrace of my apartment. I had grilled kebabs and rice pilaf with salad for dinner. I sensed something was bothering the girls and finally just came out and asked what was wrong. Mom called this morning, Taylor said. Oh? How's your mom doing these days? I asked. She found out that the patents you assigned her are almost worthless. It seems that some new company called PTK Inc. has patents that make the old patents obsolete. Every company that licensed them has allowed their old licenses to expire, so they can license new patents. No one had ever heard of PTK Inc. It was just an amazing coincidence that the first letters of the names Peter, Taylor, and Kendall made up the name PTK Inc. They both smirked as they looked at me. I just raised my wine glass in salute for having two very smart daughters. But that's not why she called, Kendall said. Tears came to her eyes. She's getting married next Saturday and she wants us to come to the wedding. I shook my head slowly. Who hasn't noticed that? I asked into the night. I received no answer. My daughters wished their mother good luck at the upcoming wedding, but explained that they would not be attending. They did not approve and did not want to have any relationship with her new husband. They said Kate is sad, but she understands. Mom takes full responsibility for ruining her marriage. She knows it was the biggest mistake of her life. With the exception of Dad, she said, nodding toward their grandfather, our grandparents supported or encouraged her. I can't understand why they are so hostile to you. Finally, the father spoke. It's because you turned your back on their little princess. Don't get me wrong, I love Kate. At least I did before all this happened. But she's always been spoiled. First her parents, which I include your mother. Then you. She never learned how to be an adult. She always had someone to take care of her. I'm worried about her. She shouldn't get married. At least not so soon. And not to this guy. But the wedding did take place. The wedding of the daughter of a prominent Fort Worth lawyer made the social media. There was no mention of the bride's first husband, nor was there any mention of the two college-educated daughters, nor was there any mention of the bride's suicide attempt on her wedding night. Saturday night when Kate was marrying deep shit. I settled down on the terrace to spend the evening with a bottle of Garrison Brothers small batch bourbon and a cigar. I was in a melancholy mood, so I brought my guitar with me to the terrace. I rarely played guitar and only sang in the car or in the shower. But when I'm feeling down, the guitar inevitably shows up with the bourbon. I hadn't touched a guitar in over a year and stumbled a bit trying to play the intro to Guy Clark's song, LA Freeway. I used to be able to play this song in my sleep, but now I was having a hard time doing so. I was playing the song non-stop and with no mistakes, or at least minimal mistakes, when my phone started vibrating, and ringing, and vibrate. Several calls at once, from the twins and my dad. I dismissed my dad's call and took Taylor's call. Daddy, did you hear that? She asked without any greeting or preamble. What did you hear? Hold on, Kendall left you a voicemail. I heard Taylor turn to her sister. Kay, my dad's calling me. Then to me, Dad, I'm putting you on speakerphone. Okay, we're both here. Mom tried to kill herself tonight. I could hear Kendall sobbing in the background and Taylor trying to keep her composure. What happened? She drank a whole bottle of sleeping pills and laid in the bathtub. It was during her wedding reception. She broke out and went to her room and tried to kill herself. Emily and Mom went looking for her and had the cleaning lady come into the room to check on her or she would have died. I exhaled slowly. I knew Kate was ruining her life with her actions, but this was bad. This was really bad. Good thing she has a family to help her through this. Too bad about her new husband. I felt sorry for my ex-wife, but as they say, not my monkeys, not my circus, or in the Texas version, not my cows, not my pasture. Can we come with you? They asked. Are you going tonight or in the morning? I was caught off guard by their question. I don't plan on going there at all. I don't wish your mother anything bad, but she fired me from my position as her husband. If you don't want to go, I'll pay for the plane tickets and take you to the airport. I'm sure one of your grandparents will be able to meet you. They were not thrilled about this and made their feelings known. The next morning, the four of us pulled onto the I-35 freeway, heading north toward Dallas. I was surprised that my dad wanted to come. He said he wouldn't have missed the shit show. I drove my dad to the Hilton so he could check us in, and I took the girls to the hospital myself. The receptionist directed us to the waiting room, and the first person I saw was Dipshit, sitting alone and staring sullenly at the floor. Mother saw me and came up with fire in her eyes. It's on your conscience, she said. All you had to do was all she had time to say before my daughters were in her face. You need to shut up, you crazy old bitch, Taylor said. Yeah, back off, Mimi, Kendall said. This is all because of Mom. She lied and cheated on our father. She got engaged to the man she was cheating with. She kept dating him, pretended to make up with Dad, and ended up marrying this cretin. And then she tries to kill herself. So tell us, my dear sweet grandma, how is all this shit our daddy's fault? My mom seemed to fall to the ground, sat down, and sobbed. Emily sat down next to her and they cried in each other's arms. Frank put his hand on my shoulder. It's not your fault, Pete. Everything that went wrong was either her fault or our fault. We should have harassed that asshole back when he showed up after you and the girls left. To our shame, we let him stay here. Dipshit looked at us unkindly as we discussed him. What's going to happen to her? I asked Frank. We're going to take her home and help her. She desperately needs therapy. I'll take her home with me, Dipshit stood up and turned to face us. She's my wife. Screw you, I said. Maybe someday she'll decide to go to you, but today's not that day. Frank stepped between us. He explained that Kate was going home to her mother's house where she would be looked after. If Kate wanted to continue the marriage, she could make that decision when her mental health improved. Deep Shit did not like this answer and hurriedly left. Shortly afterward, my daughters were allowed to see their mother. 15 minutes later, they returned to the waiting room and hugged me, crying quietly. Mommy wants to see you, Daddy, Kendall said. My mom, Emily, and Frank looked at me with hope in their eyes. Please, Pete, Frank said. It'll be good for her. I shook my head sadly. I can't do that. I'm not a relative or a friend. I'm just a man she was once married to. All three of us started crying as my statement hung in the air. I turned and walked out of the hospital. 4 days later, we were back in Austin. Before leaving Fort Worth, I discussed with Frank what had happened after I moved to Austin. When Kate and Dipshit found out that the patents I had signed over to them were worthless, their plans quickly fell apart. Kate assumed that her lifestyle wouldn't change much. Dipshit, on the other hand, thought he'd hit the jackpot. A gorgeous wife and a thriving manufacturing company were his golden ticket to a life he had only dreamed of. He would quit teaching and take over his wife's company. First, they found out that I had sold my company for pennies. Since I had sold it to employees, there was nothing they could do. Then they found out that my patents had been replaced with new patents that were in no way based on the old patents, so there was no infringement. They had to continue working as school teachers. This became an even bigger problem for Deep Shit. Kate felt she deserved everything bad that had happened to her. She was ashamed of her cheating. She was ashamed that she had lied and cheated on me. She was ashamed that she fought for the divorce and caused me more pain and suffering. She really didn't want to marry that jerk, but she felt she had to do it. Why else would she put her family through what she put them through? Ruin her marriage and burn her life to the ground for no good reason? No, at least once married, she could pretend that everything had worked out for the best. But as Frank escorted Kate to her future husband, he realized something was wrong. Kate felt like she was walking down the aisle in a dream. She was almost in a daze. Frank wondered if she had taken drugs, but dismissed the thought. Kate had never been interested in drugs. She had disappeared before the bride and groom's wedding dance, and Emily and my mom had gone looking for her. I shook my head, deciding it was all for nothing. I loved Kate with a deep romantic love, unwavering and unapproachable, until life went on. The girls went to college. My new patents were winning, and we were able to double the sales of the new company. And I started dating. People told me I'd have no problem finding a date, but I didn't believe them. My daughters got me on Tinder, Bumble, and a few other sites. They wrote my profile and took a couple thousand pictures to find the right shots for my profile. I went on a few dates, but I wasn't satisfied with the women who were interested in me. I got back in shape by shedding my dad body and getting back to my college weight. I knew I looked more than presentable and thought I was a good catch, but the women I was dating were not what I was looking for. My buddy Terry Carr had decided to focus on trusts and estate planning and was winding down the part of his law practice that represented my business. When I asked him to recommend an Austin attorney, he didn't hesitate to recommend the firm my father had worked with. They are the best in the state, if not the country. You can't think of better representation. After receiving approval, I asked my father to set up an appointment with someone who could represent my business interests. The attorney I met with was named Elizabeth Garcia. Elizabeth wasn't as tall as Kate, but she had an athletic build. Her hair was dark blonde, her skin was light brown, and her almond-shaped green eyes were green. She was exotic, gorgeous, but there was no way I could hire her as a lawyer. Lawyers can't date clients, and I was in love with her. After 2 dates, we became exclusive. After 6 dates, we realized we were going to get married. I was 43 and Elizabeth was 32. Elizabeth was also divorced. She had married a fellow lawyer, but it turned out that the main reason he was pursuing her was because she hoped to collaborate with Bonham. McLeod, Garcia. When he discovered that he couldn't use his marriage to Emily to get a position, much less a partnership, he began cheating on her. The divorce was quick and painless for Elizabeth, and for her husband, painful to the point where he left for California. For Elizabeth, marriage to an older man was not a problem. One of her ancestors, Angelica Garcia, was 10 years younger than her husband, Robert Bonham, who founded the law firm Bonham McLeod Garcia nearly 200 years ago. While I was dating Elizabeth, I sometimes thought back to my former life. I was married to Kate and lived in Fort Worth with my daughters and company. My parents and Kate's parents lived nearby, just a few minutes away by car. I thought my happiness was assured, but things changed. My parents divorced. I barely spoke to my mother, and when I did, she whined about reconciling with Kate. Kate's parents were going through a bad time, and from what I heard, were talking about divorce. They missed their granddaughters and their old life. And Kate? When she was released from the hospital, she moved back in with her parents. Dipshit wasn't happy about it. His unhappiness was compounded when she filed for an annulment. 18 months after the divorce and 15 months after her suicide attempt, Kate showed up at my door. When I opened the door that Saturday morning, I was shocked to see my ex-wife on the doorstep with a rolled-up suitcase. "Kate, what are you doing here?" I asked. I was stunned by her presence. "I know I have a lot of things to fix. I've been the worst wife in the world and a terrible mother to our daughters. I'm here to make things right." I had no idea what to say to that statement. I just stood there with my mouth open. "Honey, who's at the door?" My wife's voice brought me to my senses. Elizabeth walked into the hallway. She was wearing dark yoga pants and a white tank top, and her potbelly was bulging forward. After returning from my honeymoon, my vasectomy had been canceled. I knew Elizabeth wanted a baby, but thought I might be too old. She convinced me that I wasn't. I looked at Kate standing in the doorway, and then at my wife standing in the foyer with a curious expression on her face. "Someone I was once married to," I replied as I carefully closed the door. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for the next videos.